Okay, let us continue. I want to begin again on page 5 and say, oh, why didn't you put it on page 4? Right. But no, it will keep it on page 5. That's just easier to do it that way. And then return to where we took off last time when we begin to talk about the gates and the bridges as part of our solar system. So on page 5, the first depiction where we kind of have the solar system as we see it is a remnant of the LPU after timeline event. Energy is kept or snuck in and took over our reality field. It is kept in place by advanced technology and is as such an artificial construction. And you can see on the depiction what I'm talking about that our solar system in all ways and forms is unnatural, so to speak, compared to the original density wells. If you look at the depiction, you can say to the right, we have the solar system with the astral plane, the mental plane, the stars, and then the astral barrier. And then there's the frequency fence that is put there as well. And you say, well, shouldn't the astral barrier be closer to our reality field and the frequency fence should be further out? No, because technically, even though I keep saying the astral barrier, but that's because it connects to the vibrational field, and the vibrational field is the heart field, and the heart field is the access point to the density energies. Whereas the frequency fence is connected to the mental plane and our minds and the human neural network. So that means it's closer to our reality field. The solar system has the sun as the middle, and the sun is a construction as well, and we now know it has resumed into its density 1 LPU construction architecture. So that means our sun is not natural either. There's nothing natural about our solar system. Keep that in mind so that you understand it expands according to those who look at it. What we create, we can re-engineer it to become, and all of these kind of things. But the real worlds are the ones to the left. And there you have the Trinity system. And the Trinity systems are based upon, when you go further down on the page, you have the domain, you have the outer domain, the middle domain, the inner domain, and the core domains. And there it's built up. I could have put in the concentric circles, but that would not be completely accurate. But in a way it is, but in a way it's not. This is difficult to depict in 2D because this is holographic. So it means layers upon layers woven into each other as a manifold, as many different fluctuating fields that are changing and adapting according to the life forms that exist there. But the idea is that you have the outer domain, which is actually where our solar system is positioned. That's the whole surroundings. And then within that major circle where we have the Trinity systems, we then have the middle domain, the inner domain, and the core domain. In the middle is the core domain, and then the inner 3 spheres are connected between the core domain and the inner domain. And then you have a variation of the inner domain that is also positioned there, and the outer domain, and they overlap each other. So they are both Trinity system, as in if we were to give some kind of depiction, you would understand. There are 3 suns, 3 solar systems, and three types of galaxies and 3 types of everything in each system, and it can unfold into many different layers if need be. But there are no galaxies, there are no solar systems, and that's why it's called middle domain or systemic. It is called inner domain, and that I would like to get rid of galactic because that's from our point of view. And then the core domains where we have the architecture for the construction. So that's what we would call the pure radiation and pure consciousness fields. That's the core domain. The inner domain is where we have consciousness and radiation and vibration energies. And the middle domain is where the vibrational fields are the dominant one working with consciousness. The inner domain, that's the radiation energies, that's the dominant one. And we have the radiation fields as light fields. We have the vibrational fields as sound fields. So thereby we understand this is a density resonance system that is built upon holographic resonance fields. And it cannot be explained more clearly because you have to see it. You have to perceive it to truly understand it. So this is difficult to explain. And for those of you who remember, they are still out there from the Camelot project of Carrie Cassidy when she interviewed Ashanadine, and Ashanadine tried to explain this in her variation. That's the crystalline CRNB's adapted version of this, how they wanted to explain it, and this is my version of it, and it is impossible to put into 2 dimensions. Sorry about that. So thereby we just have to kind of say, well, until you can see it with your own inner senses and eyes and perception field and connect to it, and by that get the information directly from where your holographic architecture will then begin to create the images that you need to understand this, well, then you'll just have to take it for face value as in saying, okay, this is difficult. But what we, so and plus the text says, our planet, despite the many pictures from space, does not as such exist. It is difficult to explain, but as we learn to understand how dimensions work, we understand that what we perceive and observe is determined by the energies we consist of. If we were fourth dimensional beings, the planet and space would look totally different. So that's where we'll go into the Trinity systems. There are, the reason why I've made them that way is because we have got 3 round spheres, so to speak, with spheres within spheres and systems within systems, domains within domains that are overlapping each other. But the reason why I put 3 there as a Trinity system is because the first one, as we kind of see, is the 4th cycle, then we have the 5th cycle, then we have the 6th cycle. The top is the 6th cycle, then to the left is the 5th, and the one closest to our system is the 4th cycle. And I could put in little boxes afterwards, so you kind of say, okay, yeah, that's that one. But at the same time, it's also a bad idea to give too specific or explicit illustrations, because then your mind will face lock into that. And then when you begin to work, you will use that illustration. And then suddenly you will use what is technically a false representation. It is not accurate. And by that, you will create a wrongful type of architecture. So it's better that if you can see it. And how I see it right now is because I'm working with the 5th cycle. So that means the 5th cycle races, the 5th cycle version of the Pillar Project, similar to the ones that I've been working through since 2016 that are connected to our reality field via the astral barrier, and the hijacker technology is the 4th cycle that now is completely collapsing and fallen or being taken over by the transhuman agenda. And the middle domain and the inner domain, the core domain of that. The core domain is not affected. We have ensured that. But the middle domain and the inner domain, that's where the inner domains are connected to the phantom matrix, and the middle domain is connected to the POM races. So that the 4th cycle is in our system is now completely falling. And that's why those of us who can, we are now moving into the 5th cycle and literally just saying, yeah, there's nothing more we can do for those who are stuck in the 4th cycle. So that is the challenges that we are having. So again, when we look at the 5th, page 5, and we have the outer domain with surrounding workstations. Remember, these workstations shift according to which cycle are they in. And I will put that in, so that is put in as well. So shift according to cycles. So that means it is the same configuration, but who is working in the workstations change according to the cycle. So the ones in the 4th cycle are the remains of the enhanced human, as well as the remains of the ones that shifted into the hijackers and aligned themselves with them, as I talked about in previous 2 videos. They are part of that falling group that are now part of the demolished and destroying, because it's in the process of being destroyed, version of the workstations that were in the 4th cycle. And that's why they are changing it with the Niburian matrix of change that didn't work. They tried with the event program that didn't work, and onward and so forth, rippling into our reality. So all of that is now more or less collapsing, or being made even further artificial, kept up by AI and different types of technologies that are not beneficial for anyone, not even the races that exist there. So we could say that it's important to shift into the 5th, and that's the move that those of us who are capable of doing so will do so. And putting that one in, that is when you understand our solar system and you have the barriers are part of what allows, if you go on page 4, where we talk about overview of the stargates, so to speak. I call them the bridges, but these are what we call the main bridges, what is also being called stargates. So I will instead call them systemic gates, because that is what they are. So we have got that one in as well. And I would resume to these gate systems, but there are 3D, 4D, 5D, and 6D, and they are, of course, connected to the different variations, as we again remember in the, if you go on page 5 again, in the original inner domain, middle domain, and original construction and density energy with the holographic resonance fields. There are each, for instance, the fourth cycle has its own fourth, fifth, and sixth dimension, as well as sub-dimensions of that. And you have the fifth cycle that has their variation of dimensions. They are now not called dimensions, but layers in the holographic resonance fields. They're obviously a little bit different. The sixth cycle also have their different fields and layers and networks and gridworks that are intersecting each other, and by that give us ideas of dimensions. But it's easier just to call it dimensions, as if you have a kind of a cup or a glass of water. You can say you have the glass itself, that's one dimension. You have the water inside the glass, that is another dimension. But it does not mean that it's actually some kind of unique type of property, as in a dimension in itself, because the water will not look as it does unless it was in the glass, right? If it were in the tap, it would look different. That would be another dimensional feature. If it were in a different container, it would look different, and onward and so forth. So the domains and the dimensions act together to create specific properties. And that's where we will go back to page 3, where I want to talk about from the Souls of Humanity, page 201 and onward. The outer domain bridges are intersection points of sub-density fields, and that's what I tried to explain with the glass and the water. Dimensions of the larger domain field. So here again, we need to begin to think about fields within fields, spheres within spheres, holographic properties, where the unit exemplifies the whole and expresses different type of consciousness units. And consciousness units have inbuilt fields within themselves. They can unfold when in contact with energy systems. When genetics, consciousness units, which are called genetics, come in contact with reality fields, they begin to unfold their inbuilt architecture from where they utilize the energies of the reality field they come in contact with, so to speak. And that's why I say, if I could manifest an orb of genetics or consciousness units and transfer it to another system and align with it via a gate system, well, then that orb will begin to create a form using the energies of the reality field I enter into. And that's what we do in the restoration program as well. So the outer domain bridges are intersection points of density fields, and bridges here I'm also talking about. So I'll put that in slash systemic gates. So we got that one as well, put in here in the text material, are intersection points of sub-density fields and main domain density fields. So we have sub-density fields and main density fields. Main density fields are outer domain, middle domain, inner domain, and core domain. Sub-density fields are the larger fields within the major fields that we then can call dimensions of the larger field. That is where these two cross or intersect each other. So a gate or a bridge arises when we have in between, as in kind of, we could also say, if you have some kind of, it's difficult to say because you have the different layers of concentric circles, but on top of that, you have a lattice or a network of holographic, the holographic grid work that's imposed upon that. So you can say where that main holographic field composed of radiation vibration energies or sound and light fields are connected together and begin to vibrate the lattice or the network. Then it expresses itself into the different domains with the different density features, where each type of density field then has an access point into another density field. And these are the gates, but they need to cross each other, as in kind of overlaying each other, where you kind of have a nodal point. And this is where it gets so complex. What is a nodal point? If you have a cross, then the nodal point between the vertical and the horizontal line would be in the middle. So it's where you have the horizontal and the vertical that crosses each other. There will be a nodal point. And if there are more crossings, as in kind of a 12-pointed star, because it connects to 12 different lines of the network, of the holographic network, that means there are 12 different types of energies that intersect in the nodal point 12 different types of subfields and main fields, 12 different types of resonance fields, and 12 different types of consciousness units, because these, you could say the gates, they are technically built in energy themselves, but they are tailored in a way so they are access points or exit points for different types of species, meaning that they are coded with a signature that only allows specific type of genetics to enter or to use these gates. So it is holographic, it is made of the resonance fields, but it depends on the genetics. So that means that if I'm trying to get into a gate where I haven't existed or have no genetic affinity with, then I can't use the gate. It will be like walking into a closed door. It was bam, I will go nowhere and cannot cross it or use the bridge. So that's how that is protected. So the intersection points of a density and its grid works can be seen as the position where one subdensity field or a whole density field, that is a domain, shift into a new one. So that's how we are to perceive these kind of things. That makes it a little bit difficult to grasp or to work with, because this is so difficult to envision how that is going to unfold in that manner. So let's just say this is the best I can do with what I've got to work with in our human language. So each intersection point therefore generates a bridge slash sorry about that, a systemic gate, due to the differences in the subdensity fields and the main density field they are a part of. So this is that understanding. And again, I do apologize for not being able to give it more clearly as in, but I can still recommend you do the Ashanadine videos as part of Project Camelot. It's old material, and it was at the time where you can say, well, it's still crystalline, but at least that's a different representation of it. Not that we say, oh, that's more accurate or this is more accurate, but it's good to sometimes see how do the different races that are here, how do they explain it? And then by these different ideas, we can then begin to build up a kind of our version or an idea of how it actually is, until we're able to see it ourselves. And then you will not see it as in kind of, it's similar to when we talk about our reality. You look at your reality, you look at your room, but you don't necessarily think, or the glass of water, you don't necessarily think that the water is composed of different types of H2O that is part of the elements that are part of what you call the periodic system, that are based upon neutrons and electrons or protons, how many there are of these and how they match into the quantum fields. You don't think about that when you look at the water, but that's what we're trying to do here. That's the exercise where we're trying to say, yeah, when you look at it, you will see it as a world, but I'm trying here to explain what it's made of, similar as science tried to explain us about the quantum fields as well as the electrons. And you can see that kind of idea with the Trinity system is mirrored in the quantum fields and the way the atoms are built up. It's a similar structure, but it's a downsized one and it's an artificial one. So because of the dissimilarities in the subdensity fields and the features of the main field, the bridges differ from each other. Hence, the bridges do not have the same facilities of enabling. And here I put in 6 different types of things that these systemic gates or these bridges can do. You have entry. That is only able to enter a subdensity field. So that's kind of similar when you get into the enclosure. There's no way out unless you upgrade yourself via the different programs that are under the now fallen 4th cycle races that were part of the hijackers. They took that version of the original density field and occupied that one. And in the clearing work, everything I'm talking about, the clones and these kind of science labs and what have you, that's part of that 4th cycle representation. That is the first one and closest to our reality field. That is our solar system as it now appears for us. Then there are exit gates, only able to leave a subdensity field. So that you kind of have this, that's typically the lower levels of a reality field. To put it that way, sorry about that. If you go from a lower to a higher, you can only do entry. And that means technically entry and exit are a little bit similar. I know it's kind of, how do you mean about that? As in kind of a door you can only walk into the room, but you cannot walk out of it. So if you have a room where there's entry, you open the door and you go into the room, and then the door closes and then the door vanishes and you don't know how to get out. That's the enclosure, right? But then you have rooms where you can create an exit point. That's one you can create. That's actually the Q gates where you create the exit point, but you can only create it if you have an architecture and energy system that can ignite a temporary gate. So that is what you will do with the exit point. So that is kind of a non-local gate system. The entries also can both be local and non-local. Local means that it's stationary. Non-local means it's shift according to the observer, so to speak. Then there are exit and entry systems. And these are what we call more stationary gate systems that are more, sorry about that one. They are more in alignment with what we could say the original holographic network, the original reality field. That's where you actually begin to have a door that opens. You can open, you can go in, and you can leave again via the same door. It will remain. It's not vanishing. It's put there. It's kept there. Via the different advanced technology. So it will always be there. If you have the genetic affinity to it, you will always be able to see the exit and entry points. So then we have the connection points. The bridges are used as communication devices through the genetics. This differs from telepathy, where the genetics can connect to each other due to their similarities. Telepathy is done by projection of consciousness into the radiation field of the one holding the identical genetics, be it copies or the same racial generation of genetics. And copies are also what's understood as replicates. And replicates is something that is often used by the inner domain races to work inside the middle domains. They replicate their own genetics, put a version of them into a middle domain species or a middle domain energy system, or create an operating system where they replicate their higher order genetics and put it into a lower order type of vessel. And by that are able to operate in the middle domain. They can go down in energy, so to speak. When I say the same racial generation of genetics, that means 4th cycle, 5th cycle, or 6th cycle. So we can connect with each other. So we have the bridges that are connecting the different reality fields, so to speak, via the living beings that are there, so that we have a middle domain being that technically the energy system is inner domain, and by that is able to connect to back home, so to speak, using the expansion of the mind field or the expansion of the perception field, and work the way through connecting that way, typically manifesting as an orb back home, or connecting to a body in stasis, or connecting to some kind of device that they have made before they left. So they have a holographic representation of themselves in the original domain they came from, their original bodies in stasis, but they have the holographic interfacing system where they can communicate either in the councils. We're using the same idea when we drum up a council, holographic council. So these are some of the ways that can be used. I cannot go further into this because this is, once you get there and you have that ability to see this, just become it's so simple, but trying to explain it to someone who doesn't know what it is, it's like trying to explain the color red to a colorblind, right? So that's not possible. It can only be understood by seeing it and seeing it correctly, but a colorblind cannot see red and will therefore see it as green or orange. So that's a kind of a problem, right? So that gives a type of distortion. Then there's transformation, and that is only achievable when the energy system has developed the genetics and is done with the dimension and thus elevates or has integrated technologically enhanced genetics, enabling the same thing to take place. So that's where the architecture of our energy system transforms our ability to shift reality. So that's technically also a gate or a bridge. And then there is the complete subfield shift, And that can only be done by insertion of advanced TDs or technologically enhanced genetics, enabling this, or by altering the energy system done by the individual having full control of the energy system. The integrated genetics, the upper template, and from there shift their organic form from one level to another. So this is again where we begin to talk about complex dynamics of mastering the energy system and utilizing it to its fullest. So this is something different than most of us are aware of. But again, I can in that manner also saying, well, there are the Colontics, the old version of it, the pre 2007. Actually, we'll have to go back to before 2004 material had information teaching these kind of things from a different, again, from the crystallines in that Serum B version of it. Before, after 2007, it shifted and became something else until it had the big crash in 2012. So this is again when we talk about some of the different bridges that also goes with the beginning of the material, where I talked about the Q gates and I talked about the different Trinity gates and these understandings where we again understand this is a little bit more complex. It's not like we see in the movie The Stargates, right, where you have that fixed thing you push on a button and then it ignites. That it would be kind of how it would look inside the enclosure if we did have that kind of gate systems, but we didn't have it because we kind of had doorways between the workstations and this reality, as we also know from the military projects, where some of the kids were sitting in class and suddenly, I need to pee, and raised their hands. Could I be excused? And went to the bathroom, which were typically in another building. This is an English information I got here from one that were part of this project. Then that boy would go to the loo, open the door into the toilet, sit down and pee, and then that toilet had temporarily been shifted into being a gate, and then they would be pulled in. If someone opened the door to the bathroom, there would still sit a body there. That would be an overlay. There would still sit a child, but it would not really interact. But most people, when you're in the loo, right? So, which is the English word for being on the toilet. So in that, again, then the original body had been pulled in and were then undergoing what needed to be done, and then it would be put back in, as in 2 minutes later in our time, even though it might have been away if we were to take our time to the fourth dimension for 5 hours. But because they can manipulate with time, they can put in things they can pull it out and then put it in again in that nodal point of our reality field. So it only appears as if 2 minutes has passed. Sometimes they get sloppy, and that's where we have people that have kind of, they took off in their car, or sorry about that, they went down to the store, and then they see themselves 3 hours later on a bench somewhere, where they come back to their wits and say, how did I end here? That's sloppy. That's the grays that are sloppy, that are not really doing it well. But the original projects, that's typically under humans, they are very careful with not making that kind of mistakes. But the incoming grays of the conglomerate of the Orion factions, the negative ones, the negative alien gender, they don't really care much. They're just doing whatever they need to do. Yeah, that will work. Or pull in cattle and then just toss it out of the craft. So whatever has been going on, right? So the use of a bridge is determined by the integrated genetics of the higher order energy system and purpose and function of the genetics. The integrated genetics are for their part determined by the possibilities of the template genetics, and these can be consciousness genetics or TDs or both. Here I want to recommend you do the template science courses, so you kind of understand that how this is the template and what that means. What are the template genetics? What are the integrated genetics? And these kind of things. But we could put it in that the template genetics and the bridges are interconnected because, as I said, the genetics hold the architecture of the energy system, and the bridge is part of the reality field we intersect with as we become the nodal point or the anchor point inside a reality carrying specific genetic composition. And then that will unfold as the extended architecture, the perception field around us, the influential sphere around us. Perception field is radiation energy, influential sphere is vibrational energies, all depending on what type of organic vessel we have. And that will then allow us to work with one of the different types of bridges. And there's a reason why it's put as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, because it technically goes with the first cycle. You enter into the LPU, or you enter into the pillar project, and then you're there. The second one is where you have learned to master the 1-7 pillar, now in the 2-8 pillar, where you then are able to exit, because now you have learned the rules of engagement and you know how to navigate around in the system that you have become part of. And the third 3-9 pillar, you then are able to exit and enter, because you there have the complete understanding of the reality field. You have completed the 1-7 pillar, the 2-8 pillar, and you are in learning of the 3-9 pillar, where you learn to operate with the reality field. In the 4-10 pillar, you learn how to govern a system. You will become part of the holographic councils, hence the connection. The fifth version is the transformation. That's why you become part of the 5-11 pillar, where you begin to work with the different developmental programs, where you begin to become part of the workstations. You have a say of the different reality fields that you are participating in on an even higher level. And then on the 6-12 pillar, you there learn the complete subfield shift out of the LPU and back into the holographic metaverse. So that's how that was created to begin with. So most of the current bridges, I'm sorry about my voice today. It's really, really annoying, but there's yesterday, when I made the video yesterday on the 3rd, today's the 4th, the energies were high, therefore there was no problem. Today the energies are so low that, as usual, my body needs to clear out after sleep these things. And as always, I wish I could clear it out before I make the recordings, but unfortunately it is what we could say, the lower, as I pull in the high energies, my lower fields begins to kind of clear these things out and get rid of it. So I apologize for this coughing and going on there. It's really annoying. It annoys me, let me put it that way. I hope it does not annoy you. So let's just say that's just as it is. You should be kind of accustomed to that by now. So most of the current version of the bridges were generated shortly after the timeline event by the ancient systemic races, and thus link up to the older generations of TGs and genetics. And that's an important information. Because given that the current systemic races of the 4th cycle colonize a regressed type of beings, right, or races, have little resemblance to their ancient forefathers, the genetics in the current type of humanoids have a big role to play in why we've been sealed off and utilized as we have. Because some of them are stuck in that 4th cycle and they can't move out of the LPU as it is. So some of them, the parallel matrix races, have decided, okay, well, then we'll just create our own version of this, because clearly we can't get out. They're still in the 1-7 pillar, right? But then you have the 5th cycle races that have ability to work on the workstations, that have ability to work between the reality fields, but they need the genetic upgrading to be able to use the old gate systems so that they can elevate into other parallel systems, not necessarily the holographic metaverse, because that's the 6th gate, but they can do the 6th bridge type. But they can do the 5th bridge type, that's the 5th cycle, and that's where we have the neo-Niburians, the neo-Arcturians, the neo-this and neo-that, the new version of them in the 5th cycle, as they've recreated themselves into what we call a 5th cycle variation, where they then can travel outside the LPU and into other parallel 5th cycle systems, where they will then be represented in what we could say a more original manner than what they became as part of the LPU. So that's part of the upgrading process that they are doing as well, using our types of genetics. So the sealing off has enabled the exosystemic races to utilize the bridges by temporarily borrowing or buying the energy units from a sealed off higher order energy system. And that's the original solar system races we're here talking about. Us, that is talking about off, that is us. We are here talking about us inside the enclosure. It has also been done by harvesting the template genetics of us inside the enclosure and inserting them into their energy system. That is their regressed density 2 energy system. And I'm putting that in, of which, where most of these genetics are repulsed because they can work fine enough for a short period of time, granting the dimensional access, putting it in that understanding that even though they put in our genetics into their energy system, actually the side effect is that we create energetic parasites, whereas they get access and they leave having used our energy system to recalibrate themselves, and we are left with a residual shit show, and they have moved out, and then whatever body they had decomposed, and then they have moved on in their temporary light body, so to speak, using the gate systems, and then they have someone to greet them on the other side. Sometimes they actually do it via craft as well. So they have done this by extracting the integrated viable genetics from sealed off energy systems, leaving the emptied level 1 energy system to decay in the reintegration cycles and so forth. And the level 1 energy system is our the version we have inside the enclosure. That's what I called it in the older material. So level 2 would be the middle domain. Level 3 would be the inner domains, right? So level 1 energy system is the outer domain variation of it. So technically, when we reconfigure our lower fields, we become a level 1 energy system, tying back to some of the older terminology I had in my earlier material. So the extracted genetics are utilized as the core in a technologically enhanced genetics, enabling the TG to perform the same features that are in the extracted genetics. And that's where they link up to cubes and all of these kind of features. Thus, the harvesting and extraction of genetics must be seen in the light of the dimensional bridges too, and not only as food for the regressed or the dark ones. So this is where we begin to understand, okay, there is a little bit more to it than what meets the eye, so to speak. And again, I would say, is this something that you kind of say, oh, I need to really understand this, I need to study this because then I know what I'm dealing with. I'm just here kind of saying, no, this is just kind of need to know basis. But once you get there and you begin to see things yourself, then you will experience yourself what that is, and then it will become much, much clearer, and you will just use this as a kind of reference point from where you can build an idea of what we're talking about here, understanding that gates are not local, they are not stationary, they shift, they change form, they are holographic, they depend on the genetics, they depend on the races, it depends on the generation of the genetics, it depends on when the gate was originally created, it depends on this original function, it depends on the pillar it belongs to, and onward and so forth. So that the idea is here to understand that you need to create complexity. You need to create a kind of pattern of information that allows you to juggle the different perception levels of it, so that if you are, yes, I'm in the 1-7 pillar working with the basic level of my energy system, well, then you will only see things coming in. But if you go into the pillar 2-8 and you expand your energy system to be able to work with the 3 lower fields of the middle domain level of the energy system, as I explained in the progression science of the transition or the transformative energy system, well, then you will be able to see more complex variations of these gate systems for you in your inner eye, in your inner sight, in your inner perception of reality. But that could just as well be distortion, because you don't really know at that point if your brain is capable of perceiving the information correctly. And then you can go to the inner domain, which is the higher level of your 6-layered energy system or regional energy system. And there you will then begin to see an extended version of, okay, then we add in the inner domain grid works and networks, and there begin to see things that are even more complex, like a kaleidoscopic image of all sorts of shifting colors and features as you turn around the tube where you have the kaleidoscope, and you know these tools kids used to have. And then you go to the template level that aligns with the core construction of the inner or the core domains. And by that, you then see things from a completely different perspective, because now you're looking into all of the domains, and at the same time, you're perceiving it from all of the subfields, which means that the picture you're seeing, the visions you're getting will be enormously complex. And it's at that point becomes impossible to see it in its fullness or the completion or the entirety of it. And you will then only see what you focus on, and you will then begin to understand this enormous complex pattern you are able to perceive, but you will, because of that, focus on specific sections that then becomes local as you work with them. They will represent the purpose and the function of your scrutinizing perception field and why you're viewing that level of the entirety. So this is also where the brain suddenly is able to work on enormous complex levels, but because the brain has this tendency to focus on one thing at a time, that means that what you look at, you will then give energy, and what you give energy will then be what you will perceive, as we know from the principles. So that's where that understanding comes in, as in, oh yeah, I know all of these kind of things, but you need to see, you need to not go into not being able to see the forest for the trees, as in kind of, you have the forest that is the entire, and you have the trees that are the different units that composes the forest. And you go outside the forest and you can look, whoa, that's a big forest. Or you can go up in an airplane, you can look down and say, whoa, that's a big forest. Or you can go down into the forest, and there you will then not be able to see the entire forest, but you will see, or the wood, you'll not be able to see the entire wood, but you would be able to see, oh yeah, you'll be able to see that tree and that tree, what is in your near surroundings. And that goes with when we talk about general sciences as well, when they say that whatever point you have in space, you will always be the center, and whatever you will be perceived from that point in space that you have. So if you're on Mars, you look at space from that angle. If you're on our planet, you look at space from that angle, and onward and so forth. And reality changes accordingly. So that is where we kind of have that understanding. And I want to put in the next video. That is where I want to talk about some of the main bridges, the systemic gates, where they're positioned on our planet, where they become what we say, are they then local or are they non-local? And I want to talk about that in the next video, instead of here using 2 seconds to do so, and finish this video and continue in the next one. Thank you.